You know that feeling when the world just gets a little too loud? I don't mean the neighbors or the traffic outside. I mean that internal static. That hum of a dozen browser tabs open in your brain. The blinking red light on the microwave. The news cycle that never seems to find a gear lower than panic. It's a 2026 kind of exhaustion, isn't it? My name is Caleb, and today on Dog IQ, we're talking about something I've started calling the silent anchor. Last Tuesday, I was sitting at my kitchen table. You know, the old oak one with the scratch from the move in '98. I was trying to figure out a digital tax form, and my eyes they stopped focusing. My heart started that little flutter. Not a medical thing, just that I've had enough signal. And then I felt it. A heavy, warm pressure right against my left shin. It wasn't a nudge for a walk. It wasn't a feed me bark. It was Barnaby. He didn't even look up at me. He leaned. He put about 60% of his body weight right into my leg and stayed there, perfectly still. I realized in that moment that he wasn't asking for anything. He was giving me something. He was anchoring me to the floor because he knew I was starting to drift away into a sensory crash. Today's episode is for those of you who have felt that weight. For those of you, maybe in your 60s or 70s, who feel like the world is moving a bit too fast, and you've noticed your dog has become a sort of physical ballast. We're going to decode the silent anchor phenomenon. We're going to talk about why they do it, the physical toll it takes on them, and why it's the most profound act of love a dog can offer. Let's start with the weighted lean. In the professional training world, they call it body pressure. But this is different. This is unprompted. If you're sitting in your favorite recliner, and your lab or your shepherd comes over and just presses their shoulder into your knee, they are performing a biological intervention. They are using their proprioceptive system to communicate with your nervous system. It's a way of saying, hey, I'm right here. And because I'm right here, you are right here too. I see so many of you writing in about this. Martha from Scottsdale wrote to me last week. She's 68, lives alone with a greyhound named Pip. She said, Caleb, when I get overwhelmed by the digital clutter on my tablet, Pip comes over and just pins my foot down with her head. That is the silent anchor. Now, why the 55 plus demographic? Why is this so prevalent for us? Because we grew up in a world of tactile feedback, paper maps, physical keys, rotary phones. Our nervous systems are wired for physical resistance. When the modern world removes that resistance, our dogs step in to provide it. They are literally becoming the physicality we're missing. But there's a second part to this. If you look down while your dog is leaning on you, you might see it. The rhythmic ear flick. It's not a fly. It's not an itch. It's a slow, deliberate twitch of the ear leather. Back and forth. Back and forth. We've been studying this at the lab, and it's fascinating. It's a metronome. They are creating a physical rhythm for you to latch onto. It's like a heartbeat you can see. When you're dissociated, when you're checked out from digital burnout, your own internal rhythm gets jagged. Your dog is providing a steady analog pulse to bring you back down to earth. Now, I want to be real with you. This isn't just cute. There is a raw physical toll to this. We call it emotional mirroring. When Barnaby leans into my leg during my tax form meltdown, he isn't just a statue. His own heart rate begins to climb to match mine. He is absorbing a portion of my stress so that I don't have to carry the full load. Have you ever noticed your dog panting or acting shaky right after you finally calm down? They've just finished a shift. They've been your anchor, and the waves were high. We need to talk about the human currency of this bond. In a world of AI and automation, things that can feel very cold and very fast, this lean is the ultimate proof of a lived, shared reality. It's a high-trust signal. Your dog wouldn't anchor a stranger. They anchor the person they've spent a decade watching. They know the exact moment your breathing changes. They know the invisible sensory crash before you even feel the headache coming on. Over the next few hours, and yes, we're going to take our time today because this deserves it, we're going to look at the science of heart rate variability. We're going to hear from people just like you who thought they were losing their edge, only to find their dog was the one keeping them sharp. We're going to learn how to be a better anchor for them too, because a relationship is a two-way street, isn't it? Take a breath with me. If your dog is in the room with you right now, just look at them. See if they're watching for the lean. All right, we're going to go a little deeper now. I want to explain what is actually happening in your body when Barnaby, or Pip, or your boxer named Gerald, leans into you. Because this is not metaphor. This is biology. There's a term in cardiac science called heart rate variability, HRV. It's not just how fast your heart beats, it's the variation in time between each beat. And here's the thing most people don't know. A healthy heart does not beat like a metronome. A healthy heart has a slightly chaotic, fluctuating rhythm. It speeds up very slightly when you inhale and slows down slightly when you exhale. That fluctuation, that beautiful organic wobble, is a sign that your nervous system is flexible, responsive, resilient. When you are in a state of chronic stress, digital overload, or emotional exhaustion, that variability flattens out. Your heart starts beating in a rigid, locked-in pattern. Think of it like a river. A healthy river has bends, depth variation, eddies, little whirlpools. A stressed nervous system is more like a drainage pipe. Straight, fast, no room for natural life. Now, when a dog presses their warm body weight against you, particularly against the lower leg, the shin, the thigh, or the side, something remarkable begins to happen. Research out of the University of Arizona and follow-up work from a team in Zurich both show that within approximately 2 to 3 minutes of calm, sustained physical contact with a dog, human HRV begins to rise. The river starts to bend again. Why? Because your skin's mechanoreceptors, the pressure-sensing nerve endings, send a signal directly to your vagus nerve. Now, if you don't know your vagus nerve, let me introduce you to the most underappreciated part of your body. The vagus nerve is the superhighway of your parasympathetic nervous system. It runs from your brainstem all the way down through your throat, your heart, your lungs, your stomach. It is your biological rest and digest system. When something stimulates your vagus nerve in a slow, steady, sustained way, like, say, 60 pounds of warm Labrador pressing against your leg, it tells your entire system, the threat has passed. You can soften now. This is not insignificant. This is the same mechanism targeted by weighted blankets, by certain massage techniques, by the practice of humming or slow, deep singing, all of which also stimulate the vagus nerve. Your dog figured this out before any of us had a lab. Now I want to talk about something called co-regulation. And I want to be honest with you, this is the part of today's episode that moved me when I first really understood it. Co-regulation is the process by which one organism's nervous system helps stabilize another's. It's not a metaphor for being supportive. It is a real, measurable, physiological exchange. We see it in mothers and infants. A calm mother's heartbeat, her breathing, her skin temperature, literally teach a baby's nervous system how to self-regulate. The baby borrows regulation it hasn't yet developed on its own. What the research is now showing, and this is the part that stopped me in my tracks, is that adult humans can enter into the same co-regulatory relationship with a dog, particularly humans whose own self-regulatory capacity has been worn down by years of stress, by grief, by the cognitive load of navigating a world that was redesigned around people 30 years younger. When Barnaby leans into me, he is not waiting for me to calm down and then leaning. He is leaning in order to bring me down. He is offering me his nervous system as a scaffold. His steady breathing, that slow, rhythmic chest rise and fall, becomes the model my own nervous system tries to match. His warmth raises my skin temperature at the point of contact, which reduces peripheral vasoconstriction, which is the scientific way of saying, my body stops bracing. There's a study I keep coming back to. It was published in the journal Frontiers in Psychology. Researchers took a group of adults, aged 55 to 78, all of whom self-reported high levels of digital-era anxiety, the kind we're all familiar with. The constant pinging, the account updates, the sense that you're always slightly behind on something you don't fully understand. They divided the group. Half spent 10 minutes doing a standard relaxation protocol, deep breathing, guided meditation, the usual. The other half spent 10 minutes in quiet physical contact with a dog. No instructions, just be with the dog. The results were striking. Both groups showed improvement in self-reported anxiety, but the dog contact group showed significantly greater improvement in measurable cortisol levels, that's the stress hormone, and significantly higher HRV gains. And here is the detail I find most compelling. The effect in the dog contact group was not proportional to how much the person interacted with the dog. It was proportional to how still the dog was. The dogs who provided the greatest benefit were the ones who simply stayed. No licking, no playing, no nudging, just wait, just warmth, just presence. The silent anchor. The researchers didn't call it that, but you and I know exactly what they were describing. I want to bring in a listener story here. This one is from Dennis. Dennis is 71, a retired civil engineer from outside of Portland, Oregon. He's been a listener since our first season. He has a 10-year-old Bernese mountain dog named Hazel. Hazel is, by his description, as big as a coffee table and twice as warm. Dennis wrote to us last month. He said, "Caleb, I had a terrible week in February. My wife of 42 years had a health scare. She's fine now, everything is fine, but in those first 3 days before we had any real answers, I was living inside my own head. I couldn't eat, I couldn't focus. I'd sit in the kitchen at 2 a.m. staring at nothing. On the second night, I felt Hazel's head come to rest on my left foot. She just put her chin right on top of my foot and looked up at me. She stayed there for maybe an hour and a half. She didn't move. I didn't move. At some point, I realized I was breathing in a normal rhythm again. I don't know when it happened, it just happened. I've been an engineer my whole life. I trust data. And I'm telling you, whatever that dog did in that kitchen at 2 a.m. was more effective than anything else I had available to me." Dennis. I read that the morning it arrived, and I had to put it down for a few minutes. Because what you described is not a coincidence, and it is not sentiment. What Hazel did, that sustained, unmoving chin on foot, is one of the purest forms of the silent anchor. And the fact that your breathing normalized without you noticing is exactly how co-regulation is supposed to work. It doesn't ask for your attention. It simply changes you while you're looking away. The soul of a Bernese mountain dog, and if you know the breed, you know this, is almost uniquely calibrated for exactly this kind of work. They were bred in the Swiss Alps as farm dogs, yes, but their secondary function, their social function within a farm family, was to be a calming, heavy, steady physical presence around children and elderly family members during the brutal mountain winters when everybody was cooped up indoors for months. They are, on a genetic level, designed to be ballast. Now, let's flip this. Let's talk about what happens to them. I said earlier that emotional mirroring has a cost. I want to be very clear about this because I think it gets glossed over. When your dog performs the silent anchor, when they absorb your cortisol spike and regulate their own nervous system to scaffold yours, they are spending something. Real physiological resources, real emotional reserves. Think about it this way. Imagine you have a colleague who every day sits across from you and takes half of your emotional load onto their own shoulders. Every frustration you feel, they feel. Every spike of anxiety you experience, their heart rate rises. They do this because they love you. They do this because it is their nature. Now imagine that this person never once tells you they are tired, never complains, never says, "I've had enough today." They simply continue to offer themselves as your buffer, indefinitely. How long until that person burns out? Dogs do not tell us when the well is running low. They don't have the language for it. But they have signals, and we need to learn to read them. Watch for what happens after an intense anchoring session, after a particularly difficult day, a family argument in the house, a medical appointment that filled the room with tension. Within 30 to 60 minutes of the emotional peak, your dog may drink water excessively. They are physiologically resetting. Seek out a cool, dark, quiet space alone. They are decompressing. Sleep with unusual depth and difficulty rousing. They are recovering. Yawn repeatedly in a pattern, not tiredness yawns, but reset yawns. The nervous system releasing. These are not worrying signs, necessarily. They are honest signs. They are your dog saying, in the only language they have, "I gave you everything I had. I need a moment." And our job, the job of anyone who has a silent anchor in their life, is to notice, to respond, to give back. Before we move into our next segment, which is going to be about the threshold watch, the moment before the lean happens and what dogs are actually detecting, I want to give you something practical, a small exercise. If you have your dog with you right now, or this evening, I want you to try something. I want you to sit somewhere you feel mildly uncomfortable. Not distressed, mildly uncomfortable. Maybe it's the chair where you do your online banking. Maybe it's the couch where you watch the news. Sit there for 5 minutes without your phone, without a book. Just sit and watch your dog. See what they do. See where they position themselves in the room. See whether they begin to drift toward you. See whether they orient their body in your direction, even if they don't come all the way. Because the lean often begins as an approach that takes 15 minutes. They circle, they hover, they assess. The actual lean is the conclusion of a process that started the moment your breathing changed. Most of us miss the whole beginning of that process because we're looking at a screen. After the break, we are going to go into the threshold watch, the extraordinary sensory apparatus your dog is using to make that initial detection. What are they actually smelling? What are they actually hearing? What does your body sound like to a dog when you are starting to spiral versus when you are at peace? The answers, I promise you, are going to change the way you think about what goes on in that animal's mind and what goes on in yours. I'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's talk about the moment before, because this is where it gets genuinely extraordinary. Your dog doesn't anchor you at the worst moment of the spiral. They anchor you at the beginning, often before you've consciously registered that anything is wrong. And this is not a lucky guess. This is sensory science operating at a level that should, and I mean this sincerely, make us humble. Let's start with what a dog's nose can actually do. Because I think most of us intellectually know that dogs have a remarkable sense of smell, but we treat it as a party trick, as if it's only relevant for finding a tennis ball in a hayfield. The truth is so much more intimate than that. A human nose contains roughly 6 million olfactory receptor cells. A German Shepherd's nose contains 300 million. The part of the dog's brain devoted to analyzing smells is, proportionally, 40 times larger than the equivalent region in a human brain. But here's the part that isn't just about quantity of smell. It's about chemistry. When your stress response activates, when that first flutter of cortisol begins moving through your bloodstream, your body starts producing a very specific suite of volatile organic compounds, small molecules that become airborne through your breath, your perspiration, even through the microscopic outgassing of your skin. These compounds have no smell to us, literally none. We cannot detect them at all. To your dog, they are as obvious as a burning match in a silent, dark room. They are sharp. They are immediate. They are unmistakable. There's a research team at Queen's University Belfast that has been working on this for about 7 years now. They've identified specific chemical signatures in human breath and sweat that correlate with the onset of acute psychological stress. Not chronic stress, but the acute beginning of a stress event. Within 1 to 3 minutes of that chemical signature appearing, trained dogs, and many untrained dogs acting on instinct, will reorient toward the person and begin a behavioral sequence that ends, very often, in a lean, a nudge, or sustained physical contact. 1 to 3 minutes. Your dog knows you're in trouble before your conscious mind has caught up to your own body. Think about what that means. For those of you who have experienced anxiety, the real kind, the kind that ambushes you in the grocery store aisle, the kind that comes on without a clear trigger, your dog may have been tracking the onset of those episodes, quietly, for years, and responding in ways you may have attributed to coincidence. There's a name for what these dogs are doing. In the service animal world, they're called alert dogs. And there's a specific alert behavior, called a pre-alert, that happens before any external symptom of distress is visible. The dog stiffens slightly. Their nostrils widen. They stop whatever they were doing and orient. Then, they begin to move. That movement, that slow, deliberate, purposeful walk across the room toward you, is what I'm calling the threshold watch. It's the period between detection and intervention, and it is one of the most quietly breathtaking things a dog does. Now, smell is only one channel. Let's talk about sound. You are, right now, producing sound that you cannot hear. Your heart is beating, approximately 60 to 80 times per minute at rest. A dog, within close proximity, can hear your heartbeat. Not metaphorically, literally. The low-frequency pressure waves produced by cardiac muscle contraction are within the auditory detection range of most dogs. And because dogs have spent tens of thousands of years evolving alongside humans, reading humans, interpreting humans, surviving by understanding humans, they have developed a finely calibrated, normal baseline for each person they live with. They know what your resting heart rate sounds like. They know the rhythm of your breathing when you are asleep versus when you are anxious. They know the difference between the kind of silence that precedes you getting up to make tea and the kind of silence that precedes you spiraling. This is not magic. This is pattern recognition, built on an archive of 10, 11, 12 years of daily observation. No algorithm has more data on you than your dog does. And no algorithm cares about the output the way they do. I want to stop here and address something, because I know some of you have skeptical minds. I like that about you, by the way. And you may be thinking, Caleb, aren't you anthropomorphizing? Aren't you projecting emotional intentionality onto what is essentially a conditioned response? And it's a fair challenge. It's a rigorous question. Let me try to answer it honestly. Yes, there is a conditioned component. In most cases, the dog has learned, through positive reinforcement from the human's emotional response, that approaching during distress produces warmth, closeness, contact. The behavior is reinforced, and so the behavior is repeated. That is behavioral conditioning. That is real. But the presence of a conditioned component does not negate the presence of genuine affect. These are not mutually exclusive. Human beings comfort each other partly because it feels good, and we've been reinforced to do so. Does that mean the comfort is not real? Does that mean the love is not genuine? The neurochemistry of attachment in dogs, oxytocin production, serotonin modulation, the firing of the same mirror neuron systems that allow empathy, all of these are real, measurable, published. The dog who leans into your leg is not running a cold calculation. They are running a warm one. They are choosing you with genuine emotional valence, and the fact that evolution or conditioning helped shape that choice does not make the choice less theirs. That's what I believe. You're welcome to disagree, but if you felt that lean, I think you already know the answer. Let's go back to the sensory suite, because I haven't mentioned vision yet, and vision deserves its own moment. Dogs see the world differently than we do. They have fewer color receptors. Their color vision is roughly analogous to a human with red-green color blindness. But in compensation, they have extraordinary motion sensitivity, and they have a disproportionate focus on the face, specifically the region around the eyes and mouth. Dogs have learned to read human micro-expressions, the tiny involuntary muscle contractions that precede a consciously recognized emotional state. These micro-expressions last a fraction of a second. Humans often miss them in each other. Dogs do not. There's a study from the University of Lincoln, lovely piece of work, in which dogs were shown images of human faces displaying different emotional states. The dog's gaze patterns, measured by eye-tracking technology, consistently differentiated between positive and negative emotional states. And when confronted with negative emotional states, fear, sadness, distress, the dog's own cortisol levels rose measurably. They were not identifying stress. They were catching it. The way you catch a yawn across a room. This is emotional contagion, and it is the root of empathy in any species. So let me paint you the full picture of the threshold watch from the beginning. You're sitting at your desk. You've been trying to navigate an online insurance portal for 45 minutes. Your third password reset has failed. You've said nothing out loud. Your face hasn't changed. You haven't moved differently. To any human observer walking into the room, you look perfectly fine. But from across the room, your dog registers. A change in the chemical signature of your breath. Cortisol precursors on the air. A slight, barely perceptible elevation in your breathing rate. Your heartbeat, which they've been passively monitoring the way you monitor background music, has tightened into a more rigid pattern. The muscles around your eyes have contracted in a way that correlates, in their archive, with past episodes of distress. They stand. They orient. They begin the slow approach. They are not thinking in language. They are not deciding. They are responding, the way a river responds to a stone dropped into it. Immediately, completely, without deliberation. By the time the lean arrives, they have been monitoring you for several minutes. They have already modulated their own nervous system in preparation. They arrive already in a calm, regulated state, specifically so they can offer that state to you. I want you to hold that image for a moment. The idea of a creature who, upon detecting that someone they love is in distress, spends several minutes quietly preparing themselves to be of maximum comfort, regulating their own state so that their offer will be as pure and stable as possible. I don't know many humans who do that. Let's talk about breed variation, because the threshold watch is not equally developed across all breeds, and it's worth understanding why. Not so that you measure your dog against some standard, but so that you can better appreciate what your specific dog offers. Herding breeds, Border Collies, Australian Shepherds, Shelties, are often extraordinarily attuned to human emotional states because their entire working history involved reading the body language of both livestock and humans simultaneously. They are, in essence, emotional translators. They often intercede not with a lean, but with a precise, almost surgical placement of their body, positioning themselves to redirect your attention the way they'd redirect a sheep. It can feel, sometimes, like they're herding you back to calm. Retrievers, Labs, Goldens, tend toward the full-body lean and the sustained weight press. Their working role historically required strong, confident physical contact with humans, and their emotional attunement evolved alongside that physical confidence. They are big-hearted in the most literal sense. Sighthounds, greyhounds, whippets offer a different version of the silent anchor. Lighter, more tentative, often just a long, slender chin resting on your foot or your hand. But their sensitivity is extraordinary. They are picking up more than most breeds, processing it in a quieter register. Working and guardian breeds, Great Pyrenees, St. Bernards, Bernese mountain dogs, were bred for calm, sustained physical presence around vulnerable members of a household. Their version of the silent anchor is often simply existing near you at close range, radiating a steady, unhurried warmth, like a living hearthstone. And then there are the small dogs, the Chihuahuas, the Pomeranians, the miniature Schnauzers. Don't underestimate them. They can't provide the weight, but they compensate with extraordinary precision of attention. They will climb into your lap and press their entire small body against your sternum, against your heart, and they will stay there with a stillness that, for their size and typical temperament, represents a remarkable act of deliberate calm. All of these are the same gift, offered in different shapes. As we close this segment, I want to give you something to think about, or rather, to watch for. For the next week, I want you to pay attention to the very first movement your dog makes when your emotional state shifts. Not the lean, not the approach, the first movement. It may be as subtle as a lift of the head from a lying position, an ear rotating toward you without the body moving, eyes opening that were previously closed. That first movement, that first acknowledgement, is the beginning of the threshold watch. It's the dog saying in silence, "I've noticed, I'm monitoring, I'm with you." If you can begin to see that moment, if you can begin to recognize the very first frame of a sequence that will eventually bring them to your side, you will understand something about the nature of that animal that changes you permanently. Because it means they have been paying attention to you in every quiet moment. In every moment when you thought you were alone. In every moment when you thought no one noticed. They noticed. We'll be back after a short break. When we return, the part of today's episode I've been thinking about for 6 weeks. We're going to sit with grief. We're going to talk about what happens to the silent anchor dynamic when a human being is in the longest, deepest wave of all. And we're going to hear from 2 listeners whose dogs, independently, without training, did something in the weeks following a loss that neither of them has any scientific explanation for, but both of them carry with them every single day. Don't go far. There are some conversations that require us to slow down even further. This is one of them. Grief is a particular kind of sensory overload. It's not the acute, sharp static of a tax form or a news cycle. It's more like a change in atmospheric pressure, a constant whole-body heaviness that doesn't spike and release. It just is. Hour after hour, day after day. It rewrites your chemistry at a cellular level, and your dog feels all of it. We've established that dogs detect acute stress within minutes, but grief is not acute. Grief is a low, sustained frequency, a fog rather than a lightning bolt. What I want to talk about today is what dogs do when that fog settles in. Because it is different, it is slower, and in many ways it is more remarkable. I want to tell you about two listeners. I'll call them by their first names only. Both gave me permission to share their stories, and both read over my notes before I recorded this to make sure I got it right. The first is Eleanor. She is 74, lives in a small town in rural Vermont, and has a 12-year-old golden retriever named August. Eleanor lost her husband Robert 17 months ago. They were married for 48 years. She wrote to me about 3 months after his passing. She said, "Caleb, I want to tell you about what August has been doing. He was always Robert's dog, more than mine, to be honest. He'd sleep on Robert's side, follow him to the garage, wait by the door for him. When Robert died, I expected August to spend weeks looking for him. And he did. He'd go to Robert's chair and smell it. He'd stand in the doorway of the garage. He grieved, I could see that. But then, and this is the part I can't explain, he switched. About 2 weeks after the funeral, he stopped looking for Robert, and he started looking at me. I mean, really looking at me, with this focused, steady attention I had never experienced from him before. And then one night, he climbed up onto the bed. He'd never slept on the bed, ever, in 12 years, and he pressed his whole body along my back, all night. He was like a warm wall. He's done it every night since, without fail. And Caleb, I am not a woman who falls apart easily, but the first night he did it, I cried for 2 hours, and he just stayed through all of it. Eleanor, thank you for that. I've been carrying it since the morning I read it. What August did, that pivot from searching to guarding, is one of the most profound behavioral shifts a dog can make. And it has been documented, though not widely studied, in dogs living with bereaved humans. Something in the dog's understanding of the household equilibrium fundamentally recalibrated. Robert was gone. The architecture of Eleanor's need had changed. August, who had spent 12 years as Robert's dog, reassigned. Without training, without instruction, without anything except the compass of a heart that understands, on some level, where the distress is and what it requires. That's not instinct in the simple sense. That's something more nuanced than instinct. That is emotional intelligence in its most elemental form. The second listener is Gerald. He's 67, a retired high school history teacher from outside of Knoxville. He has a 9-year-old basset hound named Archimedes, Archie for short. He lost his son 3 years ago in an accident. Gerald doesn't write to many people about it. He wrote to us. He said, "I won't go into details. I want to tell you about Archie. Archie has always been a lazy, food-motivated, extremely average dog. That's not a criticism. I love him exactly as he is. He sleeps on his own bed. He eats. He waddles around the backyard. He sleeps some more. In the weeks after my son died, something changed in Archie. He wouldn't leave the same room as me. not a foot away sometimes, just following me from room to room, quietly, and lying down near my feet wherever I stopped. He wasn't underfoot. He wasn't demanding anything. He was just present, persistently, steadfastly present. The detail I remember most, when I would wake at 3 a.m., which happened often in those months, Archie would be awake already watching the door, as if he had heard something in my sleep that told him I was about to surface, and he would be there when I opened my eyes. He's a lazy dog, Caleb, but in those months he was never lazy, not once. I think he saved me. I'm not sure I would say that to many people, but I think he did. Gerald, I believe you completely. What Archie did, that persistent room-to-room presence, that 3 a.m. vigil, is the silent anchor in its most extended form. Not a lean of minutes, a lean of months. And the detail about waking before Gerald did, detecting through sleep, through closed eyes, through the biochemical signals of a man surfacing from a grief nightmare. That is the olfactory detection we discussed earlier, operating in the middle of the night, in the dark, with a lazy dog who turned out to be watching with the full depth of his capacity. Our dogs do not clock out when we go to sleep. They are still monitoring. The frequency of your breathing changes when you transition from deep sleep to the edge of waking. Your cortisol begins its morning rise. Your body temperature shifts. To a dog sleeping anywhere in the same room, these signals are perfectly legible. And in moments of grief, when those signals carry a particular quality of distress, the response is immediate and complete. I want to say something that might surprise some of you. Grief is not a problem that the silent anchor solves. That's not what's happening here. Archie didn't fix Gerald's loss. August doesn't fill the Robert-shaped absence in Eleanor's home. And I think it's important that we name that clearly, without flinching, because the grief is real, and it is permanent, and it is theirs. The dog doesn't take it away. What the dog does, what the silent anchor does in the long, low waves of grief, is something more sustainable than solving. It accompanies. It says, whatever this is, and however long this takes, you will not be physically alone in it. There will always be warmth on the other side of the bed. There will always be a weight against your shin that says, still here, still here, still here. There are human relationships that do not provide that. There are friendships that cannot sustain the sustained, unspectacular witnessing that grief actually requires. Not because those people don't care, but because human beings are complicated. We get uncomfortable with grief that goes on past the culturally allotted window. We want resolution. We want to know someone is getting better. A dog has no concept of the culturally allotted window for grief. A dog does not need you to get better on any particular schedule. They will lean into you on day 2 and on day 240 with exactly the same steadiness, exactly the same warmth. That is a rare thing in any relationship. Let's spend a moment on the physiological specifics of grief and what the dog is managing. In the first weeks and months of significant loss, a spouse, a child, a longtime companion, the human body enters what researchers describe as complicated physiological mourning. Cortisol levels are chronically elevated. Sleep architecture is severely disrupted. People spend more time in lighter sleep stages, less time in the deep restorative stages. The immune system is suppressed. Inflammatory markers rise. Heart rate variability, that river we talked about earlier, flattens to its most rigid state. Chronic grief, if sustained, can genuinely damage the cardiovascular system. This is not metaphor. Dying of a broken heart is a real, measurable clinical phenomenon. Physicians call it Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, or stress cardiomyopathy. The heart literally weakens under sustained grief stress. This is why the silent anchor in the context of bereavement is not a comfort. It is a clinical intervention. It is keeping that river moving when the pressure of grief is trying to straighten it into a drainage pipe. Multiple studies, including a large-scale cohort study from Harvard that followed bereaved individuals over 5 years, show that bereaved adults who live with companion animals have significantly lower rates of the health complications associated with prolonged grief. Lower inflammatory markers, better sleep efficiency, faster recovery of HRV. The mechanism? Regular, sustained, reciprocal physical contact. Co-regulation. Exactly what we've been describing. The dog is not being emotional. The dog is being medical. The dog is, quite literally, protecting the cardiovascular system of the person it loves. I want to briefly touch on something that comes up in listener mail from those who have experienced loss. The guilt. You'd be surprised how many people write to me with a version of this. Caleb, I feel guilty accepting this from my dog. I feel like I'm taking too much from them, like I'm using them. I want to address this as directly as I can. Your dog is not being depleted by accompanying you through grief. They are not making a sacrifice they resent. This is not transactional for them. The drive to stay close to a grieving member of their social group, to monitor and anchor and accompany, this is as natural and as intrinsic to them as breathing. It is not an imposition on their nature. It is their nature. That said, and I want to hold both of these truths simultaneously, they do need things from you. They need feeding and walking and veterinary care and play. They need you to notice when they are tired, but the act of accepting their comfort, that is not using them. That is completing the circuit. That is saying with your body, yes, I receive this. And a dog who offers comfort and finds it received is not depleted. They are fulfilled. The purpose has landed. Let them anchor you, and in the lighter moments, let yourself anchor them back. We're going to take a short break. When we return, a segment I want to call the language of return. What your dog does after an anchoring session. The behaviors that are easy to miss but are, once you know them, among the most communicative things they do. And then we're going to move into something practical and hands-on. How to build what I call the reciprocal anchor with your dog. Specific, simple things you can do to give back, to deepen the bond, and to make sure the relationship remains what it should be. A genuine, two-way act of love. Back in a moment. Let's talk about what comes after. We spend a lot of time, rightly, understanding what our dogs do for us, how they approach, how they lean, how they monitor. But I want to zoom in on something that most people miss entirely because they're too busy feeling better. What your dog does in the 30 to 60 minutes after an anchoring session tells you more about their inner state than almost any other behavior. There's a behavioral sequence I've come to think of as the language of return. It's the set of behaviors that mark a dog's transition from active anchoring back to their baseline self. And it has both physical and communicative elements. The first thing you may notice is the long sigh. Not a normal sigh. A long, slow, slightly audible exhalation. Sometimes so pronounced you'd think they'd been holding their breath for 20 minutes. They have, in a sense, been holding a kind of physiological tension. They've been maintaining a state of regulated calm under what amounted to emotional pressure. When you begin to visibly de-escalate, when your breathing evens, when you reach for your tea instead of staring at nothing, they detect the shift and they begin to release. That sigh is the release. It's the same mechanism as the completion sigh humans make at the end of a difficult conversation. If you're paying attention, you can catch the exact moment when your dog decides the watch is over, the wave has passed. The sigh is the flag going down. The second behavior is the shake-off. Not vigorous, not the after-bath shake. A slow, full-body roll of the skin from head to tail, as if they're resetting the surface of their body. In ethology, the scientific study of animal behavior, this is called a displacement behavior, and it serves as a neurological reset. It's remarkably similar to the shiver response some humans experience when emotion passes through and releases, that full-body shudder of catharsis. Your dog is doing exactly that, shedding the emotional residue of the session. If you see the long sigh followed by the shake-off, you've witnessed a complete emotional cycle. Detection, engagement, anchoring, release, reset. The whole arc in your living room. Third, the drink. Many dogs will walk directly to their water bowl after an intense anchoring session. Not because they're thirsty in the normal sense, it's often been less than an hour since they last drank, but stress biochemistry, even in the form of absorbed external stress, elevates core body temperature and activates the parasympathetic reset, which includes oral stimulation. Water is physiologically calming in a direct sense. It lowers core temperature and provides vagal stimulation through swallowing. When your dog goes to drink after they've been your anchor, think of it as self-care. They are tending to themselves. They are doing their recovery protocol. Let them do it. Don't call them back. Don't pet them yet. Let them finish. Fourth, and this is the one I find most beautiful, the invitation. After a dog has completed their recovery protocol, there is very often a behavioral invitation, a brief, specific contact initiated by them. A nose pressed to your palm, a chin briefly returned to your knee, a single, low, rumbling sound from the back of the throat. And then they'll often look at you, directly, with what I can only describe as checking in, making sure the person they anchored is genuinely okay, not just calmer on the surface, but okay underneath. It's the equivalent of finishing something difficult together, and then a person looking at you and quietly saying, "You all right?" Every time Barnaby does it, I tell him out loud, "Yes, I'm all right, thank you." I know he doesn't understand the words in any denotative sense, but the tone carries. The rhythm carries. He knows he's being spoken to with the whole voice, not just the surface of it. And that is enough. There is a language dogs use when they come back from holding us, not with words, not with symbols, with the body. A long sigh, a shake that starts at the collar and rolls all the way down the spine, a slow drink of water. Sometimes a few quiet minutes alone in the next room. If you have ever watched that sequence closely, you know what it is. It is not rejection. It is return. It is the body finding its baseline again. And if we are paying attention, we begin to understand that anchoring has a cost. Not always a dramatic one, not always visible to strangers, but real, felt, accumulated over time. People sometimes imagine support as an endless stream that flows in one direction. The human hurts, the dog helps. The human trembles, the dog arrives. And because the dog is willing, because the dog is loving, because the dog is so steady, we forget to ask what the experience is like on the other side of the contact. That forgetting is where good intentions quietly become imbalance. And imbalance, even when it grows out of love, is still imbalance. Some dogs recover quickly. A brief shake-off, a stretch, a drink, and they are ready to rejoin the room. Others need more distance. They step away, choose the cool floor, the far rug, the doorway where they can still see you without carrying the full weight of your state. Older dogs often do this with great dignity. They may not press in the same way they once did. They may anchor in shorter intervals, a shoulder against your calf, a warm flank against the side of your leg, a quiet chin placed for 30 seconds instead of 5 minutes. That does not mean the bond is fading. It means the body has changed and the relationship is asking for wiser terms. Aging dogs still know how to regulate a room, sometimes better than the young ones. They simply do it with economy, less force, more precision, less performance, more presence. If the whole idea of silent anchor teaches us anything, it is this. Co-regulation must become reciprocal. Not symbolic reciprocity, actual reciprocity. Something the dog can feel in muscle, breath, timing, and daily life. So what does that look like? It begins with getting lower. Literally. Sit on the floor at the dog's level once a day with no task to complete, no command to give, no therapy goal to reach. Just arrive there with them. Let your spine soften. Let the dog decide the distance. For some dogs, that shared floor time becomes the deepest reset of the day. Nothing dramatic happens. That is the point. Your nervous system stops looming over theirs. The hierarchy quiets. The room becomes simple again. Another practice is the gentle ear hold. Not gripping, not restraining, just the softest contact at the base or inner fold of the ear, if your dog enjoys that kind of touch. Many dogs do. It gives them a boundary line they can feel, a contour, a place where contact is contained and readable. If they lean in, stay with it. If they turn away, let it go. Reciprocal anchoring is consent all the way down. Then there is the synchronized walk. Not your exercise pace, not your productivity pace, the dog's pace. The pace at which they can actually sniff, orient, pause, look, listen, and let the world arrive in pieces they can metabolize. This matters more than many people realize, because for dogs, regulation is often distributed through movement, not rushed movement, patterned movement, side-by-side rhythm, a shared forward line. The body saying, without explanation, we are not trapped here, we are moving through. And then there is what I think of as the named breath. You say the dog's name slowly, once. Barnaby, Martha, Love. Not brightly, not like a cue, like an offering. Then you let one calm breath fall all the way out while they hear it. It sounds almost too simple to matter, but simple is often where mammals meet each other best. Voice tone, breath length, predictable softness. These are old instruments, far older than platforms and feeds and screens. And maybe that is why dogs matter so fiercely in this particular era. Because so much of modern exhaustion is disembodied. We live in abstraction, reaction, blue light, compressed language, delayed touch, ambient alerts, and 1,000 tiny ruptures of attention. What many people are missing now is not information. It is analog input, texture, weight, warmth, breath sound, the tiny jingle before a dog turns the corner, the shift of a body settling against the couch, the soft scratch of claws repositioning on wood. This is what I mean by an analog metabolism, a nervous system shaped to need real-world sensory contact in order to finish a feeling, not scroll past it, not optimize it, finish it. Dogs offer that kind of contact naturally. tactile, auditory, olfactory, rhythmic. And they have been doing it beside human beings for a very long time. Roughly 15,000 years of co-evolution has made them exquisitely available to our patterns, our postures, our chemistry, our silences. But availability is not the same thing as obligation. That distinction matters. Love does not erase physiology. It makes responsibility more sacred. So if your dog has been anchoring you, even quietly, even in ways you only now recognize, the invitation is not to become guilty. It is to become skillful, to notice the language of return, to honor the sigh, to make room for the shake-off, to refresh the water bowl before they ask, to let solitude count as care. And most of all, to become a steadier mammal in their presence. Less demand, more rhythm, less extraction, more companionship. Because the best version of this bond is never one where the dog disappears into usefulness. It is one where both bodies get to remain fully alive inside the exchange. That is the practice. Not using devotion until it frays, but answering it, daily, tenderly, with enough humility to ask not only, what has this dog done for me, but also, how do I help this dog come back to themselves after carrying me through the dark? And once that question becomes real, the whole relationship changes. It becomes gentler, clearer, more honest, and strangely, more secure. Because mutual regulation is not weaker than rescue. It is deeper. It is what lets love last. We will stay with that for a moment, and then we will move into what this means in the oldest dogs of all, the ones whose anchoring now comes as warmth, memory, and quiet endurance rather than force. There is one more thing we have to say about this kind of bond, and it may be the most important thing of all. The deepest anchors are not always the strongest ones. Sometimes they are the oldest, the slowest, the ones who no longer cross the room with urgency, but still change the atmosphere simply by being in it. An old dog does not always arrive with force. Sometimes the offering is smaller now. A body laid near your feet instead of pressed against your chest. A warm shoulder at the edge of the bed. A familiar breathing pattern in the dark. A presence that says, without effort, I am still here. And if you have lived beside a senior dog, you know how profound that can be. Because age strips away theater. What remains is essence, warmth, rhythm, memory, endurance. In younger years, the anchor may look like action, the lean, the alertness, the careful monitoring of a room, the quick arrival when grief sharpens or panic rises. But in older dogs, the anchor often becomes something quieter. They regulate by staying, by breathing, by holding continuity inside a house where so much else has changed. That change matters, because humans are often slow to update their expectations when devotion has become familiar. We remember what the dog used to do, how long they used to stand beside us, how readily they used to follow us from room to room. And without meaning to, we compare the present body to the past one. But love asks for a different comparison, not against youth, against reality, against the body the dog has now, against the energy available today, against the joints, the hearing, the sleep pattern, the digestion, the invisible ache we may never fully understand. This is where ethics enters the room, not as a cold rule, as tenderness with structure, as the willingness to say, your value to me is not measured by how much of my distress you can still carry. That sentence sounds simple, but for many people it is a hard one, especially if the dog has been the steadiest witness of a divorce, a death, an illness, a lonely season. A year when the world became too loud to process straight on. When a dog has carried us through those thresholds, gratitude can quietly blur into need. And need, if we do not examine it, can start making demands the dog never agreed to. Not out of cruelty, out of desperation, out of habit, out of the very human fear of losing what once made survival possible. So the final movement of Silent Anchor is not about extracting one more lesson from the dog. It is about maturing the bond, learning how to receive less spectacle and recognize more truth, learning how to call warmth enough, learning how to let companionship remain sacred, even when the old jobs are changing. For some senior dogs, anchoring becomes mostly thermal. They offer heat, a living stove at the side of your leg, a slow pulse of comfort where your nervous system can still find it. For others, it becomes positional. They choose doorways, thresholds, and line-of-sight places where they can keep gentle watch without overextending. For others still, it is almost entirely memory-based. The body itself has become a cue of safety because of the years you have already survived together. You see them, and your system remembers before your mind does. The evening settles. The jaw unclenches. Something in the chest stops bracing. That is not a lesser form of anchoring. It may be the most distilled form there is. But memory-based anchoring creates a responsibility of its own, because it can fool us into asking more of an aging dog than the day truly allows. The dog lies down near us, and we project strength onto the gesture. The dog follows us to the kitchen once, and we imagine the old stamina is still there. The dog wakes because we are restless, and we tell ourselves they do not mind. Sometimes they do not mind, and sometimes they do. Sometimes the cost appears later, in the longer recovery, the stiffer rising, the extra solitude, the missed meal, the delayed enthusiasm the next morning. Aging changes the bill, even when the heart stays generous. So adapted expectations become a form of love. Maybe the long hold becomes a shorter one. Maybe floor time replaces pressure. Maybe presence replaces contact. Maybe instead of asking the dog to come to you in the hard moment, you go sit quietly near them and let the calm organize around shared space rather than service. Maybe nighttime changes too. Maybe stairs are no longer fair. Maybe the best anchor is a bed placed closer to yours. Maybe the walk is slower now, with more pauses and fewer ambitions. Maybe comfort means warming the room before the dog enters it. Maybe care means saying no to your own need for reassurance because the dog's body has earned a gentler assignment. That is joint care, not care in one direction. Not the old story where the animal endlessly gives and the human endlessly receives. Joint care means the bond itself becomes the patient. The shared life becomes what you protect. You ask different questions. Not only, what helps me settle, but what helps this dog recover? What helps this dog sleep more deeply? What reduces strain after an emotionally heavy day? What kind of touch still feels welcome? What routines create ease instead of obligation? Sometimes the answers are practical. Water placed sooner, a softer rug, fewer unnecessary disruptions, predictable meal timing, a quieter evening, pain support, veterinary attention before suffering becomes obvious, protection from rough handling, chaotic visitors, and the subtle disrespect people often show old bodies simply because they still look familiar. And sometimes the answers are relational. A slower voice, less reaching, more invitation. A hand offered, then withdrawn if the dog declines. Gratitude spoken out loud, not because the dog needs the language, but because you do. Because saying thank you changes the shape of need. There is something else older dogs teach too. They teach us that regulation is not always about being brought back to energy. Sometimes it is about being brought back to proportion, to enoughness, to the size of an evening, the softness of one room, the mercy of one body nearby. That lesson matters in a culture that keeps asking for more output, more speed, more resilience, more performance from every living thing. Senior dogs refuse that logic simply by existing honestly. They do not optimize the bond, they inhabit it. And if we are wise, we begin to do the same. So if your dog is old now, or getting old, let this be a blessing and a correction. Do not mourn the changed form so loudly that you miss the tenderness still being offered. Do not call diminished what may actually be refined. Do not wait for the old dramatic signals if the new language is quieter, subtler, truer. A senior dog may no longer anchor with force, but they may anchor with memory, with patience, with heat, with trust so deep it no longer needs display. That is not the end of the bond. It is one of its final masterpieces. And when the day comes that even that grows lighter, when the room holds more absence than fur, more memory than breath, the body remembers, the pathways remain, the places on the floor still mean something. The hour of evening still softens in the shape they taught you. Love, in that sense, keeps regulating long after contact changes form. Maybe that is the quiet mercy of it all. That these animals do not only calm us in the moment, they educate our nervous systems over years. They teach us how to settle, how to soften our shoulders, how to stay near without fixing, how to breathe next to another living being, and let that be enough. So this is where we leave it. Not with a command, not with a technique, with a vow. If you have been anchored by a dog, meet that gift with reverence. Protect the body that protected you. Adjust when age asks you to adjust. Let devotion become mutual, especially at the end. And tonight, if your dog is near, maybe do one simple thing. Sit lower. Breathe slower. Thank them without crowding them. Make the water fresh. Soften the room. And let love look less like being saved and more like learning how to care well for the one who stayed. That is the last movement of silent anchor. Not rescue, relationship. Not extraction, reciprocity. Not using the bond until it breaks, but honoring it so fully that even change becomes another form of closeness. And if that lands somewhere tender in you, then good. Stay there for a breath. Sometimes the body understands truth before language does.